When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject: The Vision. User: Hex12. Posted June 3rd, 1998.
Change has never come easily for me. From an early age, the very suggestion was met with total defiance. I would dig my heels in hard enough, and only brute force could move me. It cost me relationships and opportunities, things I felt were a fair exchange for order. Even as people around me grew and changed, I was driven to stay who I was, to stay sheltered in the past at all costs. My home was my castle, my safe place, and I would do anything to preserve it. After all, not only had I lived there since moving out of my family's house, but my great love story had played itself out in its small rooms. It was my second heart, and I felt I could no more leave it than I could tear the first one from my chest. This might have gone on until the end of my life, if not for the vision. Though most might be tempted to describe it as a dream, I was never asleep. It simply began on a particular bad day as I was stomping from the kitchen into my living room. I was furious at myself for being in the same place I'd always been, at people I had once known who had moved on with their lives, at everything. Anger was so strong, it took a moment for me to realize there was something wrong with the living room. Above me, where there should have been a ceiling, swirled iridescent smoke in vibrant purples and greens, blown by unknown currents. Somewhere in the distance, a foghorn was blowing at regular intervals. The front of my house was gone, the interior fading into gravel and scrub brush, a cliff edge extending far beyond my ability to see. The remaining walls to my left and right pulsed slowly, as if breathing, the slow, steady rhythm of a giant at rest. A sadness I didn't know was in me burst from its hiding place, and I felt tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. Wherever this was, whatever it was, I didn't feel worthy of seeing it. Melancholy was soon joined by more comfortable emotions, fear and anger. I was furious that my home had been broken open in this way, pulled out of alignment into a configuration I no longer recognized. What had once comforted me now looked like unconvincing sets for a long, canceled sitcom waiting to be struck. I tried to will it all back to life, to force the sets back into cohesion as a home, a life, but it was out of my control. Underneath all my conflicting emotions, I knew that the only choice was to leave this fading memory and step out into the strange vista unfolding before me. With slow, halting movements, I stumbled toward what had once been the door. Sand and small stones littered the rug, causing a flash of anxiety about how I could possibly clean this all up. Of course, this anxious thought was followed by a more rational one. This isn't the kind of mess that can be cleaned, it has to be left behind. Beyond the cliff's edge, I could see only fog, puffy and white. The solitary foghorn wailed again. Up in the night sky, high above the soft gray cloud cover, flashes of silent lightning revealed soaring shapes impossible to comprehend except as perhaps some faraway progenitor of birds or several stages of evolution in the future. They traveled in perfect, synchronous flocks, swooping and diving as though they were one single organism. Looking at them filled me with an overwhelming sense of wonder and awe for something so perfectly natural and all to itself. Somehow, they were untouched by any outside influence, the purest version of themselves. As one, the flock dropped toward the earth, a shroud draping itself across the land before it answered the foghorn's call, cascading over the edge into the unknown. I turned to look back toward the crumbling remains of my home. It seemed so small now, impossibly far away. A part of me ached to return, to try and wrap myself in the comforting ghosts of my past. Maybe if I strained, I thought, I could hear an echo of laughter that had once rung out in that place. If I closed my eyes, I could taste the meals cooked among friends and conjure the sense of belonging that had felt so natural then, so effortless. Again, the foghorn called. I snapped back to find mist drifting in, clinging to my ankles. The message was clear. Whether I went back or not, the fog would settle around me, better than to embrace it, to give myself agency by making the choice. With one last longing glance backward, I approached the cliff's edge.
Subject, I told you so. User, ZipStateX. Posted, February 25th, 1998.
When John and Nadine were first talking about buying the old Arlington house behind the auto shop on Brunswick, they asked me what I thought, and I told them that shit is haunted by anything else. I knew they weren't going to listen to me. For one, John's a cop and you can't tell those guys anything, but I still went ahead and said it. That way, if David Bowie turned up to drag my nephew Dex down to the netherworld, at least I couldn't be blamed. If you told me they had speed dialed their realtor the second after hanging up on me, I'd believe you because they closed on the sale maybe a week later. A month after that, they'd moved in. Surprise, surprise, the trouble started immediately. Even without having asked me first, Nadine should have known better. She grew up here and knew damn well what everyone in Gardner thought about Shelley Arlington and his damned house. No one knew exactly where Arlington was from or how he had made his money. All they could say for sure was that he had swept in at the end of the Civil War, using his mystery money to buy up land that had previously belonged to the families of slain soldiers. By 1870, the manor that bore his name would be finished, and Arlington lived out the rest of his days there as a recluse, a sort of Reconstruction-era Howard Hughes. There's nothing in the historical record to validate any of the rumors about those reclusive years, things like rituals and dark magic, though I will say that Arlington lived to 103, a ripe old age even now. He left the house and its sizable acreage to a distant relative somewhere in mainland Europe, and that's that. Whoever those relations were, they never visited or communicated with local authorities or even bothered paying property taxes, so bit by bit the land was seized to pay the house's bills until just the structure itself remained. it became Gardner's ghost house, the one place in town everyone generally agreed was haunted, even if they'd never experienced anything supernatural themselves. Eventually, the building itself was put up for sale by the county, and it stayed unsold for almost a dozen years. Then, my lovely sister and her own personal Columbo decided they would be the ones to tame Arlington House. Given everything I've said here, you might think I don't like John, and that's not quite accurate. By all accounts, he's a good husband and father, doesn't drink or smoke, and is capable at his job. The problem is, before he took early retirement and moved north, he was a big-time detective in the NYPD, and every single thing he says is filtered through that lens, like he's still cracking cases for Rudy Giuliani and not driving a patrol car in Maine. He's like that wind-up cowboy in Toy Story, except instead of cutesy lines about the range, he has a handful of the same stories, all of which sound like they come from one of the lesser Scorsese flicks. This is why, when The Haunting in their new house picked him as its first victim, I didn't feel as bad as I might have. Right from the first night, John couldn't sleep in Arlington House. He'd go to bed with Nadine at 9, then lay there pissed off as all hell while she snored lightly next to him. Down the hall, Dex did the same. The hours would tick by, the house creaking and groaning as the wind blew outside until it was time for him to get up and go to work. After a week of this, John was a wreck, and then something yanked him out of bed by his ankles at 4 a.m. He never saw it coming. One minute, he was laying on his stomach thinking about how he was going to get put on desk duty if he kept coming into work looking like The Walking Dead, and the next, his forehead was toward their bedroom floor at warp speed. Both Nadine and Dex were woken up by the racket, the boy running into his parents' room as his stepfather was collecting himself on the ground. John tried to pass the whole thing off as him mistakenly rolling out of bed, that he didn't even try to explain how he could have rolled vertically out of the bottom of the bed is a testament to how tired he was. This is where the whole thing stopped being funny, and in retrospect, it's almost like the house was softening him up for what came next. If you ask him to tell the story now, John is adamant he was awake when, just after 3 a.m, a shadow shaped like a man walked through the wall at the foot of his bed. Startled, John tried to rise up from where he was laying and found out he couldn't move at all. It was as if his brain had been disconnected from his body. The shadow man came closer, his featureless outline covering the windows next to John and Nadine's bed. With every step, John could feel a cold, prickling sensation like static electricity forcing the hair on his exposed arms to stand up. The figure stopped right at his elbow, its crackling aura now causing stabbing sensations up John's spine and behind his eyes. He made a desperate, unsuccessful attempt to wriggle away while the shadow man bent over him, its empty face only inches from John's own. It then extended one all-black, slightly transparent hand before dipping it down through the skin of my brother-in-law's belly. Agony exploded in John's abdomen as if his guts were being mixed with an egg beater. The entity was elbow deep in his stomach now, like it was fishing around for a toy at the bottom. The pain was unlike anything John had ever felt, a tearing displacement of things which weren't meant to be touched, all while his skin remained completely unbroken. Another twist of the thing's arm, and it became too much for his mind to comprehend. Ragged unconsciousness washing over John's mind at last. I didn't hear about any of this until weeks later after he came out of the coma. According to Nadine, she had woken up to find him having a seizure next to her, the heavily corded muscles in his neck bulging. This went on for at least 5 minutes before the paramedics arrived, and who knows how long before she'd found him. Strangest of all was the fact that none of the doctors in Augusta or Portland could find anything wrong with John's body or brain. They didn't know why he'd gone into the coma and had even less idea why he suddenly woke up one day. The day he told us his story from his hospital bed was the last one Nadine and Dex ever set foot in that house. Now it's back up on the market, waiting for someone else to give their older brother an opportunity to say, "I told you so."
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.